Tonight we are going to be painting a Bumblebee in acrylics. I am working on a Fredrix watercolor canvas board. Just for transparency, this canvas was provided to me by Fredrix. They are already the only brand I used, so no difference for me there other than I let you know they sent us this canvas. So this is a watercolor canvas board and it is super smooth. And you might be thinking, well, I thought this was acrylic painting. I don't even use this for watercolor. I don't think I know anyone who uses this for watercolor. I'm sure someone does. I just don't know who they are. So this is really, really smooth. The reason that I like these is it's so smooth, it's very easy for fine detail. And I'm going to be airbrushing my background. Don't worry, for those of you who are following along, you're like, well, I'm out. No, you can paint this however you want. You can paint a solid color. You could, you know, it would be really cute. And I was super tempted to do so, just stripes. Use some tape and have a striped background would be so cute. You've got so many options. Paint your background however you want. I will be using traditional brushwork once we get to the beast, so you're still in for this. And again, a solid colored background, a violet would be gorgeous. A blue would be beautiful, like an ultramarine blue, like anything. You could use any background color you want for yours, but I will be airbrushing mine. This is an 8 by 10. I need white paint to start with. My favorite airbrush paint is the Goldens. I have a little bit of Holbein's paint left. I won't buy anything else from that company, so I won't be replacing any of theirs. I am going to be using a product called, this is Vallejo's Airbrush Flow Improver. Let's put that there. I put a couple drops of this into the airbrush before I add the paint, and that is going to make it so that my paint is less likely to clog or dry up on that needle. Like, it makes a huge difference. I already painted my background in olive green. Now, one of the questions somebody had left or made a comment, I don't know if it was in the chat last week, but somebody wanted to know how I got my colors to be more neutral, kind of earthy tone versus just so bold and bright like what you get out of the tube. The easiest thing to do is mix whatever color with its complementary color. In this case, I used a Hooker's Green and red Oxide. The complementary color to green is red. You add a little bit of that and you're going to get, the more of the complementary color you add, the more of almost a brownish, more neutral tone you are going to move towards. So purple would be yellow. If something's too bright yellow, just a touch of purple or magenta is going to tone that down. So we've got green and red, blue and orange. So blue and orange tends to go more gray on me. It depends on which shade of blue versus orange. That's more picky on using your complementaries there. But your red and green, purples and yellows are great for that. So I've got my, I don't know if you can see, a little bit of paint in there. I always test off on the side on a piece of cardboard because sometimes I don't mix things up very well. And I'm just going to start creating a really light, this is just white. This is weirdly translucent. Which white did I use? Yeah, I probably just didn't shake it up well enough. Oh well. And I can still see my lines from the bee under that, so I don't care if I airbrush over it. Now, why did I do the green first? Just to give me a base so I'm not fighting against the white. It'll make it go way faster. Because I don't mind if some of this green shows, very little would, but I would rather that than fighting against the white. Okay, well, I ran out of white from that time through, so that actually works out well. I'm going to go ahead and clean the white because the white is so opaque. I'm going to rinse this out of the airbrush before I, let's see if you can actually see while I do this, before I move on to the next color. Otherwise it would kind of make it a pastel color. So let's, palette, where's my palette? So all I'm gonna do is take a spray bottle and I just squirt in here and dump it into where all my old paint is. And that is it. Clean enough. I can run a cleaner through that if I want, but it doesn't really, for what I'm doing right now, that is fine. So I've got a couple of colors I'm gonna use, a moss green. I'm gonna start with this lighter color, this light green, which is kind of fluorescent, because it's easier if I go from a light color, then shift to the darker colors. Okay, so we start putting this in, and I'm gonna go right over the white, and look how bright that'll be anywhere where the white was. It's not that I planned on leaving the white, it's that if I didn't do it white first, these would not be light enough. I'm definitely gonna come back through and add more white though. I wanna lighten some of this up, I think. And I need some more paint. That's probably good for the, now I need more bright green down at the bottom here. There we go. Going over the dark and the light areas, just there we go. Now I'm going to add a couple more drops of my flow improver. So just a little bit in there, 2 drops. And you can do something very, very similar without an airbrush. It's just going to take a lot longer. The airbrush saves so much time for this style of painting. So this color that I just used was my moss green, so it's a much darker green. Definitely going to be coming back through with the white to lighten some of this up. And I actually poured more than I want in there, so I'm going to switch to white again and start lightening more up. But I'm actually going to shake up the white this time. So I'm going to run this to make sure it's clean. I just take a paper towel and run that through until it runs out. I can run water or a brush cleaner through that if needed to, if I need to. So once it gets to this point, it's not completely clean. You can see a little bit of that tint of that green. It's good enough though. You really don't need it perfectly clean. Just most of the way. Okay, 2 more of the flow improver. I'm going to actually shake up my titanium white better this time because that was, I may just be running low. Yeah, there's not a ton in there. Let's lighten this way up. There we go. There's the opacity I wanted. And see how nice and soft and how fast it goes. Like it's very, very fast to get this soft of a look. Again, you can do this with wet into wet. Don't feel like you can't make something similar. It's a slightly different look, but I'm going to do some dots so we get the hint of flowers in the background where I'm going to put some purple. It's out of focus, so really we're not trying to put a bunch of detail, just dots are enough in some various sizes. And you don't have to work as fast as I am. I've got a limit because of it being a live stream, so I try to go through pretty quickly, but you can take your time. There's no rush for you. And if you're following along, just pause the video. And I want these out of focus flowers back here. Look at that reference photo. It's got all the information you need. I don't need it exact. Close is close enough. That'll be a darker purple. Let's see. I'm going to lighten where that green will go. Otherwise, that won't really show. I don't need to lighten where the dark purple is. It's where the lighter lavender would go. Otherwise, it won't really show up very well. So for those of you who are painting, hand painting in, you would paint in your actual flowers here. That's gonna take you a lot longer. And yours will probably be more in focus. That's totally fine. But you can always use your fine mist sprayer. If you saw my raccoon video, the one from, it was a while ago, over a year ago. That one, or about a year, I don't know, something like that. That one has, shows you how to use a fine mist sprayer to keep it wet so you've got time to get all of your blending done. It can absolutely, what I'm doing could look almost exactly the same. The only reason I'm not doing that is it takes a lot longer. And I wanted this to be really good for whoever buys it. Like if I have to rush it, it's not gonna look that good. Not for the amount of work this would take to make that look blurry. And if you're serious about acrylic painting and you like this style, I definitely recommend invest in an airbrush. It is like a must-have supply for me. I love it. It is quite an investment though. One of the mistakes a lot of my students have done over the years is go to eBay and get some cheap thing thinking, oh, I'm just gonna spend $75 because they had a whole setup with everything I needed to start and I'll see if I like it. Okay, that $75 could have gone through the $500 you need to get the good setup, to get everything you need. The problem with a lot of those cheap ones is they break. So you'll read reviews where people are like, oh, it's so great, it worked good. Yeah, for like 2 days. So they leave the review and then it breaks and then it's like they are not a long-term product. I would rather see you save the money. And if you're thinking, well, I don't know if I'm going to like it. My attitude about that is if you like the look, learn to like the medium. It takes some getting used to. And the nice thing too with this look, the out of focus is the easiest thing to do with the airbrush. The thing that's harder is when you're getting a lot of control with lots of tiny detail. I am not practiced in it. That just takes a lot more practice. Wow, that wasn't redundant at all. But this sort of thing, super easy. Like day one, you're getting a blurry out of focus background. I've got to lighten up anywhere where I'm going to want those purples. Keep that soft. And I want to make sure I go over the bee so that I don't have a halo effect going around it. And that's going to be the same for those of you painting by hand. Make sure if you've drawn in your subject, overlap that some. You don't want a light line where it doesn't quite touch the subject. That always looks terrible. It's kind of your I'm an amateur sign when you have this line around the subject where you didn't quite go up to it. Okay, that's probably good enough. We can start with the purple. And I've got enough of the white left. I'm going to pour some back into my container just to save it. Not that that much will save, but there's a little. And I'm just spraying and dumping. And then I can run it out on a paper towel. Add a little bit more water. And I'm just running water through the airbrush right now. Not that you can see it, but that's what's happening. That's down here. Super helpful. Okay, that should be good enough. And I will still need to add green along that stem. Now, whenever I do this sort of background, I hate it until I start painting in the subject because it's so out of focus. You feel like it should be more detailed. It's not supposed to be. But if that happens and you're just like, oh, it's not coming out right, it's a normal feeling until you start painting in that subject. Just, again, because it's so out of focus. And a lot of what I do when I do this sort of out of focus background, it's just dots. You know, if I just barely go, look how just barely letting that go over the lighter purples. I'm not letting a lot of paint, whereas this, I'm just putting in really heavy. Again, this reference photo, if you're following along, can be found over at my website. Link is in the video description. I may not even need the magenta, that purple. I mean, yeah, the reference photo has it, but it's really pretty with just the purple. I'll probably add a little. See how I've got variation with the darks? All with that same paint. I'm not having to reload it. It's just a matter of how heavy I'm putting that on there. And this looks more like a blue on the camera to me right now. I may have to adjust that. The green looks right, but it's more of it's dioxazine purple. It is purple purple. And you can do regular brushwork on top of any of this as you need to. Okay. Do I need more of this? Darken a few areas up. See, again, I'm mostly doing dots as I build up the shapes in here. And this, I'll show you, hopefully this camera will give me better color. This is a really pretty purple. I'm super happy with how this is coming out. Okay, let's rinse this. Actually, no, I'm just gonna throw some magenta in there. Let it mix in the container. I'll usually just take a clean paintbrush or the end of a brush and stir that while it's in there when I mix a color like that. I'm gonna throw a little bit of white as well because I want more of a pastel color, and opaque is fine. Remember, if you add white, you're adding titanium white, you are making it more opaque and pastel. So it's not as simple as lightening the color. So if you're not trying to lighten a color, that's probably not the choice you want to make. And you notice I have this board behind me. It's just an old piece of cardboard. I use that all the time when I'm airbrushing to test colors, because I've got to feed it through. And actually it needs a little bit, I've got too much white. I need some more color saturation in there. So I'm gonna put some more magenta, a bit more purple, stir that again. Let's see how this goes. We are actually almost done with the background. That should work better. There we go. Oh, that's a perfect color. I love it. Okay, I'm pretty excited about this now. It's still mostly focusing on just little dots. And the farther away your airbrush is from the canvas, the more blurry and out of focus that area is going to be. And I don't need this to be the exact color as the reference photo. I'm just trying to get the values about the same. Dark's dark enough, light's light enough. Okay, let's add some more white to this. Stir it up again with the back of my paintbrush. Oh, I screwed up. Now I have to rinse it because I actually used the front of the paintbrush. Genius. I'll be using you later. Okay, so we've got it a little bit lighter again. Oops, a little bit of a splatter going on there. I really just want a few little dots. Now don't go too heavy either. You too close and you like let that blast out, you will end up with like a splatter effect that's not super cute. Now, one of the airbrush paints that I used to use a lot was Createx because it's easy to get at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's. The problem is it's meant, at least the kind I was using, was meant for a 0.5 needle, the stuff that they carried at those stores, and it kept clogging the airbrush constantly. It got really frustrating. So I was always having to thin it out with water, which you can do, but it is much easier to just go with the Goldens for the airbrush paint. It works with a 0.3 and a 0.2 needle just fine. That smaller size without clogging. Now these flowers here are slightly more in focus than these ones, so these are, I've held the airbrush back further. As I move into these, that's where I'm getting closer. Okay. So that is about done. I might pull a little bit more magenta on a couple of those. He looks good how he is, because it doesn't really need it. I mean, at some point, I'm just making things more complicated, and then it needs to be. No, I do want a little bit more magenta, so I'm going to rinse this out. This magenta is going to be strong, so I need to just barely, let's see if I can not go out of control here. Just a little bit to tint some of the color. And when it's out of focus, it does not need to be, like if you're looking at my photo and you're like, oh, that's way different, it does not need to be the same. I think I'm even going to pull a little bit more dark purple into this. Okay, a couple drops of the dark. And the airbrush, I mainly use it for special effects, like out of focus backgrounds, or like, let's say there's a polar bear and he's got smoke, you know, not smoke, that's the wrong word, frost, or yeah, frost, frost, is that the right word? What is it? In the cold. I don't live in the cold. I don't know what you people call that. You can see his breath. I would do that with the airbrush. We're not trying to make this super precise here. This is all supposed to be out of focus. Okay, one more thing. I do want a couple highlights with white, and I also want that green. So let's clean this out. Run water through it again. And this is why you always want to test your colors. Like you can see right now what my paper towel looks like, because that was supposed to be the color of this. Like that was not, there was just enough of that magenta left in there, even though I'd rinsed it, that it would not have been a fun time had I gone with that. Okay, now I need a teeny bit more white and we will call the background done. I'm really happy with how that came out in that amount of time. See, that's why I love how fast the airbrush is. You can get something like that done very, very quickly. And when you're trying to produce, well, live stream, obviously, we've got a bit of a time crunch there. But if you're trying to get a lot of work done, like you're getting ready for an art show, you can knock something like that out for your background that fast. And wait till you see how much it, like the bee will stand out so much. Like there's so much depth in this because of having this out of focus look. That was a little bit bold. Okay, I'm gonna rinse this out. We get to start with the traditional brushwork. So those of you who've been waiting for the next step because you weren't airbrushing, it is your turn. To clean this out pretty well. And if your airbrush gets completely clogged, I just take it and soak it in warm water with airbrush cleaner. Like I do like a 50-50 mixture. I just soak it for like an hour or so. Depends on how bad it is. And then wipe everything down. Okay, let's run some airbrush cleaner through. Nope, that's Vallejo Flow Improver. Where's my, the bottles look almost the exact same, so that would not have helped. And I can always go back. This isn't like, let's say you're working in watercolor and colored pencil. That's an actual mixed medium, so you would not want to put watercolor on top of the colored pencil. Like once you're done with watercolor, you are done with the watercolor stage once colored pencil started. With this, it's still acrylic paint. It's a different form, it's a different type of brush, but it is acrylic paint, so I can go back and forth. Let's say I wasn't sure, like, oh, I don't know if I want to change that background later. I can come back after I painted the bee in and make adjustments if I want to. It's not like a mixed medium where sometimes you can't do that if they don't play nice. It has no problem going back and forth. Okay, let me put all of these paints away. And my gum, I eat these frozen food things that come in these little plastic containers, but that seems so wasteful for like a plastic thing for a frozen food. Yeah, I keep them and use them in my paints. They're like easy to clean out. Like they are my favorite. I have a ton of these and I use them all the time. So yeah, if you kind of a fun little, I guess, upcycle. Is that what the cool kids still call it, or was that too old? But I don't have to buy, it's like 2 birds, 1 bowl. I don't have to buy extra containers. I just have a huge collection of those. And I can let that one completely dry out and it just like peels out and then use another one in the meantime. It's very convenient. Okay, so here is my palette. Notice that I've got oops, that's not the palette, that's the palette. I've got a wet paper towel in here. And the reason for that is because I put the paint out already by leaving a pretty wet paper towel and putting the lid on the Master's palette. It holds the glass, the New Wave glass palette. Links are in the video description. But because this is in here, when I put the lid on it, it keeps any of this from even starting to dry out. It keeps the humidity up, so we are all good there. Now I've got most of the colors I need. I do need some titanium white. I don't think I need more than that. I always put out more than I need. And I got deep violet because it turns out the purple I grabbed was not the purple I needed. What I wanted was deep violet. That purple has white mixed in it. It is way too opaque. So on to the bee. I'm going to start by just mapping things out. I'll just start with black. And I may as well use a rake brush if I can find one. My brushes are kind of all over the place right now, so most of tonight's video will be brought to you by Lisa looking for her brushes. Actually, while I look for those brushes, this is a good time for a message from the boys. Without treats, these puppies are so sad. Your Patreon pledge of only $4 or more gives them cookies of happiness. Act now and the bad cow gets a treat too. Oh, and you also get over 300 art lessons and a new one every single week, plus other rewards. Sign up at patreon.com/Lachri. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start by just painting the black in wherever that goes on the bee. I'm going to use a rake brush. This one is a 1/4 inch silver ruby satin filbert grass cone. I've got a video somewhere showing you how to use rake brushes. All the rake brushes that I use are listed in there. So I'm just going to start, I'll actually add a little bit of deep violet so it's not too like dead black. It just looks dull and flat if you use black by itself, so that is why we are going to start with this. Looks like a little bit of his eye is over here, but then this is kind of floofy. You've got to have a good balance of paint versus water to make this work. You're using it like a whole bunch. I can turn my airbrush off. Hold on, let's see if I can do it with my foot like a monkey. That's not working. I will pull something. Okay. But the rake brush, what this is essentially, think of like your normal filbert brush. This is your filbert brush. A rake brush is this. So it's a whole bunch of little brush strokes in one brush. But it depends on how you use it, how much pressure you add. If you push too hard, it's just a filbert. If you load too much paint or too much water, it's just a filbert. If you don't load enough, it's just a filbert. So you've got to balance out how much paint versus how much water so that you can see these little lines. Actually, that was what I wanted. I do remember what I wanted to show you. I think the color, yeah. There's the color of the purples and pinks There, you can really see there that is not showing very well on the other camera, but the bee color should look accurate. Okay, so we've got, whoops, see, that's just a normal filbert, too much paint. Wipe some of that off. There we go. And now we've got the black. We'll fade into more red oxide as we move back there, so I'm not going to put it on super heavy. Need a bit more water in that paint mix. And this is like a dark, dark plum. You really want to watch the direction of the floof. That is so important here. And that's really what I'm mapping out more than anything else here. Make sure it's going the right direction. See how it starts switching? I'm gonna reload a little bit more water. I can probably zoom in a bit more for you there. That'll work. Although now I can't see the painting because the camera is right in the way. So notice when I use the rake brush, I will usually wipe it on the board first, just to make sure I'm not too heavy. Although I could use a little bit more of that back. Okay, now I can start going a little bit more solid in here. We've got this really dark area and then it'll fan out. And I'll put white over where I need more detailing. So if I go too dark, it's not a big deal. I'm going to add a bit of my red oxide in with this as I move out. It's going to lighten up. So it's, oh, I need more of the plum in that. That's too light. Now, whenever I use the rake brush, I'm still going to come through with a liner brush and define things a bit better. If you use just the rake brush, it's really common to have things look too uniform. It all looks too much the same. Wow, I'm just on top of the whole making really redundant statements. Like, let's see how many different ways I can repeat that. But it looks if it's too uniform, it doesn't look natural. So by coming back through with a liner brush for just a few of the brush strokes, it'll break it up. Remember, where I'm pushing harder, I'm not getting that fluff. And now I will need a row of this color in through here, but if I do that right now, it's not gonna, I have to put white over that anyway, so the timing on that, like, it just wouldn't work as far as the order of things. So we'll come up here, and it looks like my easel or my camera keeps freezing, so that's always extra lovely. Thank you for that, camera. Super helpful. Wait, that was light, that is dark. Where do we have white, black? You are just part of this, I think. Losing my place here. So this is part of his leg sticking out. And then we've got the dark, so I'm going to rinse my brush, go back with the darker plum. And this is where I lost my place before. Okay, so this was definitely dark black. Now right now, all of this is really flat, like it's just dark. I'll come back through with the highlights later. So we've got the white, a little too thick there. Let's reload that with a bit more water. That was titanium white, right? Yeah. Sometimes I put out transparent mixing white instead of titanium white. That's always a fun surprise. This is way too thick of paint on it. There we go. Give him a really fluffy butt. See, I'm letting some of that green background show through, so it's like extra detail and shading without having to do extra detail and shading. Make life easier on yourself if you can. Now this is going to be yellow, but I need to paint it white, otherwise it will not be yellow over that background. So by putting white first, that's opaque, it covers my green, and that will let my yellow come out really yellow. I've often heard people complain that they thought their paint was not good enough because it wasn't opaque enough. It's just how you're layering it. Put white down, and then you can put the color on top. See, again, letting the greens show through. Now, for those of you doing the group challenge that I just posted over on Patreon, this is very similar to what I was talking about in that landscape. Look at the rows. It's the same with fur. You've got rows, and I don't mean lines, but your fur, same thing as in that landscape, things are moving in clumps and clusters and rows, and that's what you really want to watch in that group challenge. The rest of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sorry. Give him his little fluffy legs. He did not shave for the winter. Now right now this is just white, so it doesn't look right. We will tone all that or clean all that up in a bit once we glaze color over it. Sometimes when you're using a rake brush, you just get the most perfect amount of paint versus water. This is one of those times. These brush strokes are coming out so perfect right now. Unfortunately, I have to reload it and try again. I ran out of paint. But there we go, same thing. Like just using that perfect light amount of pressure. And I have just the right amount of paint versus water on that brush. Too much or too little, and it's not going to work for you. You could do all of this with a liner brush, it just takes a while. I would say the liner brush is probably easier though. It's much easier to control. It can be quite difficult to get a natural look with the rake brush. And that's one of the reasons that I like the filbert rake brushes versus the flat. The flat edge, where it's just like straight across versus the rounded like this, the flat edge, it is really difficult. Like each brush stroke is way too harsh. So we've got a little bit more of a solid look. It'll just glaze over once we do the wings. Like I really like the size of this where you can see all the detail of the fluff. This is going to be the highlight that I'm doing right now, so we'll be glazing over that. It's not going to stay white. Well, really, most of this isn't. Fluffy leg. Anywhere where I need it to be really bold yellow, I'm going to put a little bit more white, or so that the yellow stands out even more. Because right now you can see where that green is showing through. That's going to be more muted where I put the yellow, which is good on some areas, but the areas that need to be like really bold, like down here, I need that to be more opaque. So I'm going to put that white on a bit thicker. Throw some longer fluff on his rear because it's adorable. Okay, I'm going to dry this and we're going to glaze some yellows over this. Okay, now we're going to start adding some yellow. I'm going to start with a bright yellow first. We can make it darker easily, but it's a lot harder to lighten back up. So I'm just glazing right over that. Yellow is very translucent on its own, so I don't need to add a ton of water to get that effect. But the more water you add, the more translucent it will be. Despite some old-timers' belief system, and that seems to be what it is. People from the past, younger artists seem to not have such an issue with this, but I think the older folks were just told for too long, don't mix water with acrylic paints, it's binding and bonding and it won't. And then there's a YouTube video that tells people that, and the man was arguing with me about it recently. Anyway, you can mix water. You can mix almost any amount. You would have to mix like 95% water to paint before it would start to have an issue bonding or binding to the paper. You are perfectly fine to mix or thin your paint down with as much water as you want. Like no one's going to use 90 to 95% water. There'd be no reason to. So you are perfectly fine doing that, even though some folks will try to insist you cannot. Like the video that turned her comments off here on YouTube. That seems super. That video gives me, like, that has been such a headache because every time I start showing people how to add water to the paint, I always inevitably get the question, I heard you couldn't do that. And it's because of that video. Like, it's not the artist's fault for not knowing. No, the artist asking me, it's not their fault for not knowing. It's the videos they watch. The person who made the videos and leaves it up, spreading completely false information. That's what drives me crazy. Okay, we're going to start adding some of the red oxide. I'm going to get this darker and then I'm going to have to come back through with highlights on top of that, but we'll start with this. This also works well for parts of the wing. And we'll do part of the leg. Actually, I want that to be a bit more brown, so I'm going to pull from where I had mixed black in with that. And then I'm going to take that same brownish tone in here. I can put it in here, but it needs to be light. Now, one of the things that's really nice with using a canvas like this that's so smooth, you can dry brush, which is almost what I just did right there, but it does not look like dry brushing. I do not, there are very rare cases I like the look of dry brushing with acrylics. More often than not, it just looks like you don't know how to paint with acrylics. Like it's a technique they teach you in books for beginners, like it's some great thing. It's not, it looks bad. Like it almost always, there are exceptions, there always are, but the nice thing when you're using a canvas that's this smooth, you can pretty much do that easy, simple dry brushing technique and it doesn't even look like it. Pull that a little bit further out. I'm just using a filbert here. We've got to start building up the depth. So I'm going to start pulling some magenta into this as well. A little too magenta. Let's go with the magenta that was mixed with, or where I had that plum. Oh, that's way too much black. Mixing my red oxide and a little bit of black and the deep violet, which I just called magenta, but it's actually deep violet. That gives me a nice brownish tone. That's what I want. That magenta was just a little too high on here. And right at the edge between that black and the yellow. And we're going to put a little bit out here too. He's got part of his little antenna shows there, and with the way the light is hitting it, will not be completely black. This one will have black go over it. But we'll start with just a base there. Okay, I'm going to rinse that, and I'm going to pull some, I actually need the purple dioxazine, which I do not have the paint out right now. So what I will do is take the airbrush paint, and I'm just going to put a little bit of the airbrush paint, because that's what I used in the background. A ultramarine blue would also work, but I'm not going to use that because I didn't use it in the background. If I didn't use it in the background, I'm not pulling a new color just for highlights, if I can avoid it. Now, if I did not have purple in the background, let's say it was all green, then I would go ahead and pull in the blue. But because I had used the purple before, I am going to use that for the highlights on the black here. Let's add a little bit of white to that. We've got a lighter area back here. Same thing, I'm just dry brushing that. So it looks all smooth, but it does not even look like it was dry brush. Now I need to do a glaze. Let's find a color for the wing. We'll do some yellow, some red oxide, and some white. So the transparent mixing white will lighten it without making it, so I'm going to start my batch over again. It'll lighten it without making it more opaque. There we go. This is getting closer. I'm going to put a little bit of magenta in that too. I don't need perfect. I just need something that's kind of lighter, a little translucent. Let's see how that looks. It's probably too light. No, it's, oh, that's perfect. I love it. Did not expect that. I was pretty sure I was going to have to mix another color. And so what I'm doing is dry brushing again. It's kind of a glaze, but kind of a dry brush. And just tinting that. I want some of the green to show through, so I'm going to dab some of that up. I'm not trying to cover it completely. I've got to fix this because his body should continue this way, and I missed that when I shaded that in. So I've got to darken up here. Pull some of his floof up. And what was the next thing? The yellow. Some yellow and white. I've got to throw white in there or it is not going to show up. I could do a base of white or I can mix the two right now just because it's behind the wing. I'm just going to mix them. So this is a bit more of a solid look. We don't want to see all the fluff. We want to see the fluff there. Let's see, we need to get some of that purple for the shadow now under the white. So we've thinned that down with water. Just a little bit there. Okay, now I'm going to start focusing on the wings. I've still got to come back and do some detailing on the body as well. So being that I'll have the liner brush out, we'll just do all that kind of at the same time. So I need a darker brown. So mixing my red oxide and black together. You can just use brown paint if you've got it. I don't even buy it anymore because at least with the Liquitex Basics, it tends to get chunky and I just don't go through fast enough before it starts getting chunky. So I just mix it with red oxide and black because I use both of those a lot. You know what? I should stop being stupid and putting my hand in wet paint. Let's try this. So now is when we start putting like that tiny, tiny, like the real detail that gives you that, it makes the background look so out of focus. This camera is totally in my face. Kind of makes it difficult to see what I'm doing there. And where I want it to fade out, I'll just put a little paint, take a clean brush, just slightly damp, and just smudge that out. So we have a whole section here that would smudge out. So you have that softer look. So some of these are a very harsh line and some are just, it fades into a sort of shadow. And I don't care if I have all these lines exact. Close is close enough. But I still want it based mostly on the photo. And just look at your reference photo. Now the thing that makes the wing look shiny, it's going to be that high contrast between our lights and our darks. So it will feel scary, but when you back away and look at it, you get that really pretty shiny look. Put a little bit of the brown, and then I'm going to smudge that. And that's a little too thick of a line, so I'm just going to thin that out. And I'm going to even throw a little here, but I'm going to pull it in so it looks really translucent along that edge. Okay, I'm going to put the darks in the other wing before I come back through with the highlights. I'm going to smooth some of these out so it's not just a straight harsh line there. And these lines will overlap, but they're way too harsh, so I'm going to take that brush and we'll push that back, but lighten them up. Perfect. We've got a shadow that comes along the edge, so I'll put the line and I'm going to take that clean, slightly damp brush and smudge it out. The more detail you want, it's easier. If you like a lot of detail, work larger. That will make your life much easier. Like if I was trying to do this on a 5x7, doing these little lines would be a bit of a pain. Possible, but not as enjoyable. Unless you like miniatures. Some people like that. You also want to remember, if you're making prints of your work, you do not want your prints to be larger than the original. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll just blow this up, I'll take a good high quality photo, use a DSLR, it'll be a huge photo, and then I can just print it larger. It will look like crap. It will look like absolute crap. When you try to take a photo that is small and make it bigger, the information is just not there. You're asking the computer to, or the camera, or the program, whatever you're doing, you're asking it to add information that it just isn't there. So it'll look kind of out of focus, kind of blurry. That's not an issue of the printer. It's not an issue of the camera. It's an issue of your print should not be larger than your original. That's why if you look at my print shop, some of my prints, I've got like 30 by 40 inch sizes, and some of them I've only got 8 by 10s. And it's just dependent on what the original was. You can get away with a little bit larger, and it's not a huge deal, but the larger you go, the worse that starts to become. That line was way too thick, so all I have to do is thin that out. We're just going to push that back. And now it's nice and thin. Okay, let's start pulling some of the highlights and then more details. So I'm just going to use my titanium white. I'm not using transparent mixing white because I do want this to be opaque. We're going to start making some dots and little highlight lines. At this really high contrast, that makes it look shiny. We've got some dots where the light is catching the edge of the not the feather, the wing there. Wrong animal. Now we'll get some of these little hairs that are a bit thicker than the liner brush was, or not the liner, the rake brush was. A bit more defined. Same thing, we'll pull a few in here. And they still move in those rows. See how they're clumped and clustered together. So just like that, the Patreon group challenge I was talking about earlier. These hairy knees. You should not wear shorts, sir. I want to get some more of the defined little butt hairs coming out here. Wow, that is so something that could be taken out of context. His bum hairs? Nope, still sounds bad. I'm just using my titanium white here. Bee butt fuzzies is what Nick says. And he's a beekeeper, so he would know. The technical term must be bee butt fuzzies. That is a way nicer way than what mine sounded like. Make sure these cluster. If it comes out a little too white, I can go back over and glaze some. I just want to get that detail back in there. Oops, that is way too light. There we go. We've got a whole darker area back here. Or not darker, lighter. Words are hard. So I'm going to add a little bit more of this kind of grayish brown tone. Too dark, more white. And I want to pull a little bit more yellow in a couple of these spots and we will be done. He's cute. He looks better in person. The color saturation is not quite there with the purple. Actually, I just saw something else I need to fix. Huge spot that needed more detail. I'm just going to glaze a little bit of yellow on a couple of these spots. And it'll go right over those white areas, so it really makes that detailing show up better. I think he is about done. I like how this guy came out. Do I need a little bit? Yeah, I do. One more thing I want to do. You had to know if it was a bee, I was going to want to spend extra time on it. I just like painting bees. So I'm going to pull a little bit more fluff from the black paint so it overlaps the other colors now that the other ones are in. Just need to thin that with a decent amount of water. So if you look closely, I'm just overlapping a little bit so he's even fluffier. A little bit more, almost done. Okay. And then he will be varnished with Liquitex High Gloss Varnish. I'll make a video, you'll see that in the next day or two of that. But I am really happy with him. He looks super cute. Let me pull this back out. You can see the whole painting there. Let me get him here so you can see the color a bit better. You're more of these pinks and purples. Like the color saturation is really pretty on those purples. It just doesn't pick up on that. You can really see it doesn't pick up on the other camera.
Hey, you. Yes, you. I see all your unused art supplies over there. Oh my God, those brushes aren't even opened yet. Tragic. You keep buying new fancy materials, but you don't use them because you don't want to waste them. Stop making your art supply sad. Sign up for art lessons for as little as $4 a month. There are over 300 painting and drawing lessons available when you sign up, and new ones every week. Patreon.com/Lachri.